Marry me, and I'll help raise your daughters, Millionaire woman said. His answer left her speechless. It was the kind of rainy Tuesday that made the whole town feel like it had hit pause. The coffee shop windows fogged with the breath of strangers, and the scent of burnt espresso clung to the air like a tired sigh. Inside, Michael Hayes, a 35-year-old single father of two, sat hunched over a chipped table, eyes glued to the screen of his old phone. His checking account had just dropped below 200. Across the table, his daughters, Claire, 8 and Maddie, yes 6, were pressed against the pastry case, their wide eyes lighting up at the sugary display. Claire tapped the glass gently. "Dad, can we get the chocolate croissant? Just to share." Michael's heart clenched. They'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for 3 days. "Maybe next time, sweetheart," he whispered the lie, bitter as ash. That's when she appeared. A woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair, swept into a low bun, and wrapped in a tailored trench coat that whispered wealth, stepped up to their table. "Mr. Hayes," she asked, voice smooth but firm. Michael's first instinct was protectiveness. "We're fine," he said quickly, shielding the girls with his body. She offered a small, understanding smile. "My name is Evelyn Carter, and I know this is sudden, but I've been looking for you." Michael blinked. "What? You were a Marine. Fallujah, 2010. You saved a young woman from a burning convoy. Her name was Natalie." Evelyn's eyes suddenly glistened. "She was my daughter." The world seemed to tilt. Michael's stomach dropped as a rush of memory overtook him. Flame screams, the acrid stench of diesel, and the frantic grip of a hand he'd sworn to never forget. "She told me about you before she died in a car crash 3 years ago." Evelyn continued gently. "And she made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I would find you." Michael could barely breathe. Claire and Maddie were quiet now, sensing something bigger was happening. Evelyn pulled out a tablet and showed him a grainy photo from years ago. His face dusty and young, crouched beside a burning vehicle. "I made a vow to my daughter, and I keep my promises," she said. Then, almost too softly to hear, she added, "You saved my daughter's life. Now I want to help you save yours." And before Michael could respond, she placed an envelope on the table, thick, elegant, sealed with wax. "I have a proposition, one that could change everything for you and your girls." Michael looked at his daughters, then at the woman who without warning had reached into his darkest day and pulled out a flicker of light. And in that fogged-up coffee shop, the storm outside no longer felt quite so cold. Michael didn't open the envelope until the girls had gone to bed that night. He sat on the edge of their shared futon in their tiny apartment above a mechanic's garage, the dull hum of traffic outside like a low, constant sigh. Inside the envelope wasn't money as he half feared and half hoped. It was a formal letter typed on embossed paper. A proposal, not a business one. A marriage proposal. "Marry me," Evelyn had written, "and I will help you raise your daughters. I offer you a home education for the girls' healthcare security, and a partnership, not love, but purpose, a life built on mutual need and trust." Michael stared at the words until they blurred. Was this some kind of twisted joke? The next morning, he stood outside the downtown library after walking Claire and Maddie to school, the letter burning a hole in his coat pocket. He reread it twice more, while leaning against a bench, ignoring the cold pressing through the wood. Evelyn Carter had everything. She was the CEO of Carter Solutions, a logistics empire. Her net worth could probably feed his entire neighborhood for a year. Why would she want him? That night after the girls were asleep, Evelyn called. "I know it's insane," she said calmly. "That's why I didn't ask you in person. But it's not charity, Michael. It's a promise. To my daughter. And to myself." Michael hesitated. "You don't even know me. I know enough. I know your wife passed away 4 years ago. I know you haven't dated since. I know you applied to 217 jobs in the last 8 months. I know you sold your wedding ring to pay for Maddie's asthma medication." His hand flew instinctively to his bare ring finger. "You had me investigated. I had you protected," she replied, "because you were slipping, fast, and those girls don't deserve to lose another parent." The phone was silent. Then Evelyn said something that made Michael's breath catch. "I don't need a husband. I need a reason to come home at night. I need to hear laughter in the halls again. I need to fulfill my daughter's last wish. And you need help. But more than that, you need hope." The words hung between them like trembling glass. "Come see my house," she added softly. Bring Claire and Maddie. They should see what their life could be. Then you can decide." Michael sat in the dark for a long time after hanging up, not moving, not crying, just thinking. Could you marry a woman you barely knew? Not for love, but for survival. He didn't know the answer, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table for 2 more days. Michael couldn't bring himself to throw it away. He carried it with him like a question, like a lifeline, or maybe a betrayal. Late one night, after tucking Maddie into bed and helping Claire finish a school project using cardboard and glue sticks, he found himself pulling out the old shoebox he kept hidden under his bed. Inside were the fragments of a life that had slipped away too soon. Photos of Emily, his late wife, laughing in a sundress holding newborn Claire dancing barefoot in their first apartment. A worn birthday card with her messy handwriting, a tiny hospital bracelet from Maddie's birth, and nestled in tissue paper at the bottom, her engagement ring. He'd planned to give it to Claire one day as something to remember her mother by. He held it up to the dim lamplight, the diamond still catching sparks, even though the gold band was scratched. "What would you do, Em?" he whispered to the silence. Outside, the city groaned in its sleep. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Inside, all he heard was the soft rise and fall of his daughter's breathing through the thin walls. He wanted to believe Emily would understand, that she'd want their girls to have the chance to grow up with stability, not scarcity. He could almost hear her voice. "Take care of them, Mikey. Whatever it takes." The next morning, he called his sister Lauren in Chicago. "Are you sure?" she asked after he told her about Evelyn's proposal. "No," he admitted, "but she's not some stranger trying to play savior. She's someone who made a promise to her daughter. And I can't ignore that." Lauren was quiet. Then she said, "You've always put those girls first. Maybe it's time someone put you first." That night, Michael sat alone on the couch with Evelyn's letter on his lap and the ring in his hand. He picked up his phone. Text message, "I'd like to discuss the terms. When can we meet?" Reply from Evelyn came within minutes. "Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. Bring the girls." Michael closed his eyes and exhaled. He was about to walk into a world completely foreign to him. But something in his chest, something that had felt dead for years, stirred ever so slightly. Hope. The black sedan pulled up right at 6:59 p.m. It looked like something out of a movie, sleek, silent, and far too expensive for the cracked sidewalk in front of Michael's apartment building. Claire and Maddie stood on either side of him, their thrift store dresses smoothed and their hair brushed with extra care. "Daddy," Maddie whispered as the driver opened the door. "Do rich people always smell like new cars?" Michael smiled faintly. Maybe just the really rich ones. The ride to Evelyn Carter's home felt surreal. The city skyline turned into manicured lawns and ivy-covered gates. Finally, they arrived at a brick Tudor-style home nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, glowing warm from the inside out. "This is like a fairy tale," Claire whispered as the car stopped in front of a red front door with a brass lion knocker. Before they could knock, the door swung open. Evelyn stood in the entryway, not in a power suit, but in dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. Her hair was tied back, and for the first time Michael noticed the laugh lines around her eyes. "Welcome," she said, kneeling to look the girls in the eye. "I'm so glad you could come. I made spaghetti, and there's cookies for dessert." Cookies were a universal icebreaker. Inside the home was elegant but full of life. Bookshelves crammed with novels, family photos on the walls, and a fire crackling in the hearth. 2 golden retrievers ambled over tails wagging. "This is Charlie and Hemingway," Evelyn said, as Maddie squealed and dropped to her knees to pet them. "Wonderful de bon." The girls were instantly at ease. Evelyn gave them a quick tour ending upstairs, with 2 rooms side by side. Claire's was painted in soft lavender, with shelves already filled with age-appropriate novels. Maddie's room had a cheerful yellow theme and a play corner filled with art supplies and stuffed animals. "You decorated these?" Michael asked, stunned. "I had help," she said. "But yes, I wanted them to feel like they belonged here, not like guests." Back downstairs, Evelyn guided Michael into her home office. It was a quieter, more personal space than the polished boardroom he expected. On one wall hung a collection of photographs. Her daughter Natalie as a child, in her military uniform on her wedding day. "She would have made a wonderful mother," Evelyn said quietly. Michael glanced through the glass wall where Claire was showing Maddie how to play the piano, badly but joyfully. She still might, he said without thinking. Evelyn turned to him, her expression unreadable. Let's talk. Before you decide anything, you deserve to know what this really is. Michael nodded slowly, not quite ready to admit it, but already seeing something he hadn't seen in a long time. A future. 3 weeks later, under a canopy of string lights in Evelyn's backyard garden, Michael Hayes stood in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, feeling like a guest at someone else's wedding. Except this wasn't someone else's. This was his. The soft strumming of a cello played in the background. A handful of guests sat in white folding chairs on the grass. Evelyn's assistant, Mrs. Douglas, who had become something of a grandmother figure to Claire and Maddie. The family therapist, a judge Evelyn had known for years. And Michael's sister Lauren, who had driven in from Chicago that morning with teary eyes and 1,000 questions she never voiced aloud. Claire and Maddie walked ahead of him, sprinkling rose petals as flower girls. Their faces glowed with a joy that nearly broke him. At the front of the aisle, Evelyn stood under a wooden arbor wrapped in climbing roses. She wore a simple ivory dress, her silver hair swept elegantly over one shoulder, and around her neck hung a delicate gold locket. Inside was a photo of Natalie in uniform. As Michael joined her, she reached for his hand and squeezed gently. No regrets, she whispered. He looked at her, then at his daughters, then at the life forming around them, like scaffolding on a once broken home. None, he replied, surprised to find it was true. The judge kept the ceremony brief, but when it came time for their vows, Evelyn turned to face him with eyes steady and soft. Dan decies bindings afford. Michael, she said, I promise to be your partner in raising Claire and Maddie. I promise to respect the boundaries we've set while staying open to where this journey might lead. I will never try to replace the woman you loved, but I will honor her by loving her daughters as fiercely as if they were my own. Michael swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Evelyn, he said, voice quiet but sure, I promise to stand beside you as we build a family from the pieces life left behind. I'll be your partner, your friend, and I'll raise our girls with everything I have. Not because I have to, but because I want to. There was no kiss, just a warm hug, a shared breath, and a kind of sacred stillness. Claire and Maddie ran to them, wrapping their arms around both of their waists. The judge declared them married, but the real ceremony had already happened in the silent promises that passed between them when no one else was listening. That night they shared dinner under the stars. Spaghetti as the girls had requested, and toasted with sparkling apple cider. Laughter echoed from the patio. Stories were shared, and in the quiet moments, Michael caught Evelyn watching the girls with something that looked very close to love. Later, when the house had gone still, Michael returned to the guest bedroom Evelyn had set aside for him. As he lay in bed, the baby monitor picked up Evelyn's voice from the girls' room. She was reading a bedtime story. Claire interrupted to ask a question. Maddie giggled. And for the first time in years, Michael fell asleep without fear, clawing at the edge of his mind. By spring, the house didn't feel like Evelyn's anymore. It felt like theirs. Michael had slowly grown into the rhythm of this new life. Morning routines filled with mismatched lunchboxes, afternoon piano lessons, and bedtime giggles echoing through the halls. The cold formality he once feared had melted into warmth and routine. Evelyn was no longer just a successful businesswoman with a hidden heart. She was becoming something else. Someone who knew exactly how Maddie liked her sandwiches, crusts off cut into triangles, and who taught Claire to play Claire de Lune with surprising patience and joy. The same woman who once ruled boardrooms with iron will now crouched on the floor, helping assemble a science fair volcano. One afternoon, Michael returned from physical therapy, easing himself into a kitchen chair. His back was healing slowly. The therapist said he might never lift concrete again, but there were other options. Consulting safety oversight, paths Evelyn had gently encouraged. The smell of cookies drifted from the oven. Evelyn stood at the counter with flour on her cheek, helping Maddie measure sugar. Claire walked in from school, tossing her backpack onto a chair. Guess what? Dad, I got an A on my math quiz. Evelyn helped me study. Michael raised his eyebrows, impressed. You mean she survived math with you? Claire rolled her eyes playfully, but the pride on her face was unmistakable. After dinner, they gathered in the living room, the girls sprawled on the floor, drawing pictures, the dogs curled up by the fireplace. Michael and Evelyn shared coffee on the couch. Quiet content. This wasn't what love looked like in the movies. There were no grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but there was something powerful in the everyday. The way Evelyn always made sure the girls had someone in the crowd at their school performances. How Michael found himself looking for her face in the stands just before Claire took the stage. They had agreed to keep separate bedrooms, and they did. But over time, the emotional distance had closed. They began finishing each other's thoughts, sharing inside jokes, touching hands a little longer when passing plates at dinner. Michael found himself opening up to her, talking late into the night about things he hadn't told anyone since Emily died. Evelyn listened, never judging, sometimes sharing pieces of her own grief too. The silent ache of outliving her daughter, the guilt of wealth that couldn't fix everything. It was in those moments, unspoken and unpolished, that their partnership began to change. One evening after the girls had gone to bed, Evelyn handed Michael a folder. "Dr. Lee," she said softly, "a career coach I trust. He helps veterans transition into new fields. I thought maybe you'd want to talk to him." Michael looked down at the folder, then up at her. "You always see me even when I don't." She smiled, small and genuine. "That's because I care." And in that simple exchange, something shifted. Not loudly, not immediately, but undeniably. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming a family. It started over something trivial. Evelyn had suggested hiring a housekeeper to help manage the growing needs of their 5-bedroom home. With Michael starting part-time consulting work and Evelyn ramping up travel for a new logistics acquisition, the household had begun to feel stretched. But when she brought it up over breakfast, Michael's reaction surprised them both. "I don't need someone else handling my responsibilities," he snapped, placing his coffee mug a little too firmly on the counter. Evelyn raised a brow, trying to keep her tone even. "It's not about your ability. It's about giving us all more breathing room." "Oh, I get it," he said, the sarcasm cutting. "You want to outsource the poor single dad's duties now that you've rescued him. Neat and efficient." The air in the kitchen went still. Claire and Maddie were away at a weekend sleepover. The house should have felt like a retreat, a rare moment of peace. But now it felt like a battlefield. Evelyn crossed her arms slowly, her voice low but firm. "Our daughters, Michael? They're not just your responsibility anymore." That stopped him, but only for a second. "This is what this has all been about, isn't it?" he said, anger rising with every word. "You stepped in because you saw some broken man with kids and thought, here's my redemption arc. I was managing just fine before you came along." Evelyn paled. His words landed like a slap. Her voice shook, but she didn't shout. "You were not fine. You were 3 days from eviction. Claire had dropped 10 pounds from skipping meals. You sold your wife's ring to pay for Maddie's antibiotics." Every sentence was a hammer blow. "I stepped in because you were drowning," she added, tears now, pushing against her composure, "and I loved them too much to watch it happen." Michael's pride and shame battled in his chest, a mix of guilt and fury. "So, this was charity," he said quietly. "You married me because you didn't want to feel useless. Because saving us gave your grief meaning." Evelyn turned her back to him, trying to breathe. "You think I braided Claire's hair for months because of pity. You think I stayed up through Maddie's night terrors just to feel better about myself." She turned then, and for the first time since they'd met, Michael saw her cry. "I'm terrified, Michael," she admitted. "Terrified you'll wake up and realize you never needed me. That I was just a stand-in for a life you actually wanted with someone you actually loved." Silence filled the kitchen. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth of her vulnerability struck him deeper than her anger ever could. "I'll be in my office," Evelyn said, finally her voice returning to its professional cool. "There are calls I need to make." She left without looking back, leaving Michael standing there, surrounded by crumbs of breakfast and broken trust. He hadn't meant to hurt her, but he had, and for the first time he wondered if their fragile arrangement could survive a fracture this deep. It had been 4 days since their argument. The silence between Michael and Evelyn was civil, measured but miles wide. They moved through the house like ghosts sharing a stage, saying the right things at the right times, but never anything more. The warmth that had once flickered between them now felt like smoke from a fire left untended. Michael had started sleeping in the guest room again, not out of anger, out of uncertainty. One afternoon, while looking for Claire's immunization records to enroll her in a new summer program, Michael opened the bottom drawer of Evelyn's filing cabinet in her home office. The folder wasn't hidden. It was just labeled plainly, "Private investigation, Hayes family." Michael's stomach dropped. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Some of him walking the girls to school. Others from across the street as he fed quarters into the laundromat change machine. A few showed him sitting on the park bench near the playground, head in his hands, unaware he was being watched. He flipped to a document marked Psychological Risk Evaluation. His name was listed at the top. Beneath that, subject displays signs of chronic depression, withdrawal, and potential self-harm. Behavior indicates a need for immediate support and mental health intervention if current living conditions persist. Michael couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a background check. This was surveillance, diagnosis, a blueprint of his darkest hours neatly categorized and archived by a woman he had trusted. He was still staring at the file when Evelyn walked in. "I thought I heard the door." She stopped. Her eyes landed on the open folder. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Evelyn closed the door quietly behind her. I can explain." He stood the file trembling in his hands. "You had me psychologically profiled. You followed me. You knew everything before we ever met in that coffee shop." "Yes," she said, "because I was afraid." "Of what? That I might embarrass you? That I wasn't stable enough for your charity fantasy?" "No," she said, stepping closer, "because I was afraid you might not make it. That you were slipping away and no one saw it. Not even you." Michael's fists clenched. "Did you marry me because you thought I was going to kill myself?" Her voice cracked. "I married you because I didn't want two little girls to lose the only parent they had left." Michael stepped back. The betrayal wasn't just that she'd watched him. It was that she'd known. How close he'd been to the edge. How he'd cried in the dark when the girls were asleep. How he'd stared too long at train tracks on bitter days. And he hadn't known she knew. "I need space," he whispered. "From this. From you." Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes shining with regret. "Take what you need. But Michael, please, don't mistake my silence for apathy. I never saw you as weak. I saw you as someone who needed someone to believe in him again." He left the room. The folder stayed on the table, glaring like a mirror he hadn't asked to look into. The cemetery sat on a hillside, overlooking the sleepy edge of town, where the grass was kept too neat and the wind never seemed to stop moving. Rows of polished stone markers stretched under the gray sky like silent witnesses. Michael waited by the gate. Evelyn pulled up 10 minutes late, a bouquet of white garden roses in her hand. She looked tired, older than usual, like someone who'd been carrying too many words without saying any of them out loud. They walked in silence to the grave. Natalie Carter, beloved daughter, brave soldier, kind soul. 1987-2020. A small American flag fluttered beside the headstone. Someone had left a tiny silver music box at its base. Its lid closed but dusted recently. Evelyn knelt to adjust it without saying anything. Michael finally broke the silence. I should have asked about her sooner, not just about what she wanted, about who she was. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes softening. "You're not too late." He stared at the name etched in stone. What was she like, really like? "She had my ambition," Evelyn said with a distant smile, "but not my edges. She was softer, thought deeply, fought hard, had this way of making you feel seen, even when you didn't want to be." She paused. She also never finished her coffee. "Drove me crazy." Michael let out a small laugh that surprised them both. He turned to her. "That promise she made you make. I want to hear it. Exactly how she said it." Evelyn swallowed hard. She was lying in a field hospital half-conscious. A medic said her last words were, "Tell my mom to find Michael Hayes. Tell her to keep her promise. Tell her that love doesn't always look like romance." The wind shifted. Something in the air felt heavier. Michael took a step closer. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me, Evelyn." She nodded, bracing herself. "If Natalie had never made that request, would you still have come looking for me after reading the psychiatric report?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She sat down on the low bench beside the grave and stared into the distance. "I'd like to say yes," she said quietly, "that I would have seen someone hurting and tried to help. But I'm not sure I would have had the courage without Natalie's words pushing me." Michael stood still, hands in his pockets. So it really was suicide prevention. It was that she said gently, and a mother's guilt, and maybe, just maybe, the start of something I didn't expect. She looked up at him. Does it change everything for you? Michael didn't answer. He was still processing the truth, that he had been chosen, maybe even saved, not just by Evelyn, but by a dying woman he barely remembered. But when he looked at Evelyn now, he didn't see calculation. He saw someone who had been just as lost, who had built a ladder for him while standing knee-deep in her own grief. Claire and Maddie are happy, he said finally. You've given them a life I never could have. Evelyn blinked but said nothing. Then Michael added, I don't know where we go from here, but I don't want to walk away from what we've built. A long pause. I'm still angry, he admitted, still hurt. I know, she said softly, but I'm here. If you want to figure it out. They stood side by side at the grave, bound not just by a promise, but by the fragile, precious thread of something beginning again. They didn't go home right away. Instead, they walked slowly through the cemetery, down quiet sidewalks, past homes lit softly from within. No more accusations, no more confessions, just silence that felt like healing instead of distance. Later that night, after tucking Claire and Maddie into bed and whispering the usual, I love yous, Michael stopped in the hallway outside Evelyn's room. The door was open. She was at her desk typing something, hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked up when he knocked on the frame. Do you have a minute? He asked. Always. They sat on the small couch by the window. The city lights blinked outside in scattered patterns, as if the world was catching its breath. I've been thinking a lot, Michael began, about us, about what this started as, and what it's become. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, but didn't speak. When we married, I thought I was doing it for the girls, for stability, security, and for a while, I believed that was all it was. He glanced at her, but somewhere along the way, that changed. Her eyes widened slightly. You became more than my wife, on paper. He continued. You became my partner, my friend. You know my rhythms better than anyone. You laugh at my bad jokes. You taught Maddie how to bake and Claire how to play Chopin. He took a breath. You didn't just build a home. You helped rebuild me. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. Michael? I'm not saying I'm in love with you, he said, cutting gently through the moment, because I'm still figuring out what love means after Emily. But I care about you. I trust you with my girls. With my heart. That has to count for something. Evelyn reached out slowly and took his hand. It does, she said. I care about you too. More than I expected. More than I thought I ever would again. They sat in the quiet for a moment, the unspoken slowly taking shape between them. I don't want to go back to separate bedrooms, Michael said finally. But I also don't want to rush into anything we're not ready for. She nodded. No timeline, no expectations, just honesty. He smiled. And more nights where you don't try to sneak extra chocolate chips into the cookies. She chuckled, guilty. As they stood, Evelyn paused. Michael? Yeah, I've been meaning to show you something. She walked to a small bookshelf and pulled out a photo album. Inside were pictures from the past year. Family dinners, birthday parties, school plays. Claire asleep on Evelyn's lap. Maddie and Michael baking. The four of them at the beach. One page showed a photo from their wedding day, framed under a quote written in Evelyn's handwriting. Love doesn't always look like romance. Sometimes it looks like choosing each other, every day. Michael looked at her. I want to keep choosing you, he said. Evelyn smiled through misty eyes. Then let's see where this takes us. They stood there holding each other as the lights dimmed around them. No grand declarations, no perfect ending. Just the quiet, steady beginning of something real. 2 years after that rainy afternoon in the coffee shop, the morning sun poured into the Hayes Carter kitchen like golden silk. The house was alive with motion, laughter, and the scent of vanilla pancakes. Claire, now 10, sat at the piano in the next room, her fingers dancing confidently across the keys. She was working on a piece by Chopin, one Evelyn had introduced her to during their first winter together. Michael listened from the kitchen, stunned every time at how much she had grown. Careful with the eggs, Evelyn called, smiling at Maddie, who stood on a stool next to the counter, holding a cracked egg over a mixing bowl. I did it. No shells this time, Maddie cheered proudly, showing off her success. Michael ruffled her hair and stole a kiss from Evelyn's cheek. The simple gesture, once foreign, once uncertain, now felt as natural as breathing. They had moved into the same bedroom 6 months earlier. There had been no dramatic declaration, no romantic fireworks. Just a conversation late one night where they both realized they no longer needed the walls between them. Evelyn adjusted the flame under the skillet. "You ready for your big day?" Michael nodded, excited honestly. Today was the grand opening of Hayes Safety Consulting, Michael's new business venture. With Evelyn's quiet support, he'd built something he could call his own, helping contractors design safer sites and avoid the very mistakes that had cost him his back years ago. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something in me when I couldn't." Evelyn turned to him, eyes full of something deeper than pride. "You did the work, Michael. I just lit a path." Claire wandered into the kitchen, her fingers still twitching with the memory of music. "Dad, can we get those forms signed for music school? They're due Monday." Evelyn perked up. "We've got everything ready. I even included your audition video." Michael grinned. "If she gets in, she owes it to you." "Nope," Evelyn said. "She owes it to herself. I just helped her believe she could do it." After breakfast, as backpacks were zipped and jackets thrown on, Claire lingered by the door. "Dad," she asked hesitantly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Do you think Mom would have liked Evelyn?" The question hit Michael squarely in the chest. It wasn't the first time he'd thought about it. Emily's presence was still felt. Her photo on the mantle, the stories they told on her birthday. But it had been a while since she'd come up like this. He crouched to Claire's level. "I think your mom would have loved Evelyn. Because Evelyn loves you girls the way your mom would have wanted. And I think she'd be grateful." Claire nodded, blinking quickly. "Good. Because I love her too. I just didn't want to forget Mom." Michael hugged her close. "Loving Evelyn doesn't mean forgetting your mom. The heart doesn't run out of space. It just keeps growing." From the hallway, Evelyn's voice called out, "Let's move, team. First day of business, and we're already behind." Claire laughed. "She's basically a general." Michael smiled, standing tall. "Yeah, a general, and the woman who'd helped him rebuild everything." It was late afternoon by the time Michael returned home from his first client meeting. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops, casting golden light across the Carter family's ivy-covered home. The porch creaked softly under his steps, and from inside, he could already hear Maddie's giggles and Claire's piano drifting through the windows. He opened the front door to the smell of fresh-baked cookies and the chaos of homework scattered across the dining table. Evelyn stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, humming. As she washed dishes, her hair pulled into a loose braid Maddie had insisted on styling. She looked up. "Well, how'd it go?" Michael dropped his keys into the bowl near the door and let out a long breath. They signed. Henderson Construction officially has their safety protocols redesigned, and they're referring me to 2 other firms next week. Evelyn dried her hands and walked over, smiling. "Told you they'd love you." He chuckled, then pulled her close. "You said that after rewriting my pitch slides. Twice." "It's called executive Polish," she whispered, tapping his chest. They stood like that for a moment, 2 people who had once been strangers, now sharing the kind of intimacy that only time, trust, and effort could build. From the hallway, Claire's voice rang out. "Dinner in 10. I set the table." Maddie followed a second later barefoot, and holding a picture she'd drawn, stick figures of their entire family, including the 2 golden retrievers, Max and Leo. Evelyn and Michael were drawn holding hands with a speech bubble over each of them that read, "I love our family." Michael knelt to look at it. "This is beautiful, kiddo." Maddie beamed. "It's for the fridge." As they sat down for dinner, Evelyn raised her glass of iced tea, to new beginnings again and again. Claire raised hers too, to families that don't have to be perfect to be real. Michael looked around the table, at the girls who had healed the woman who had helped rebuild him, and the home that had grown out of uncertainty and quiet, steady care. There was a time he thought survival was the best he could hope for. But now, he was thriving. Because somewhere between desperation and grace, between loss and redemption, they had all chosen each other, day by day, meal by meal, moment by moment. A family. Unlikely, imperfect, real. And for the first time in a long, long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Stories about love often start with sparks, sweeping glances, and whirlwind romance. But this one, Michael and Evelyn's, started in the cold grip of survival in a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, where hope had nearly run dry. It wasn't passion that saved them. It was a promise made by a dying daughter, a promise carried forward by a grieving mother, and a promise accepted by a broken man who had nothing left to give, except the fierce love he held for his two little girls. What followed wasn't easy. It wasn't picture perfect. It was awkward, complicated, and full of missteps. But somewhere along the way, through spaghetti dinners, school concerts, hospital bills, bedtime stories, and hard conversations, something extraordinary happened. They became a family. Not because they were bound by blood or tradition, but because they chose each other every single day. Evelyn found purpose. Michael found healing. And Claire and Maddie, two little girls who had once slept on a pull-out couch in a one-bedroom apartment, found joy's security and the kind of love that wrapped around them like warm sunlight after a long storm. Their story reminds us that love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it comes disguised as help, as partnership, as a quiet offer across a coffee shop table. Sometimes love grows in the space between grief and hope. And when it's real, it doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Because in the end, what matters most isn't how a family begins. It's how it chooses to stay together.